everyone. It's still morning,
Good
right?
morning.
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. And thank you all for joining us. I want to start by just each of you just give me a snippet about who you are, a minute or two, just to give the people who are here context for our comments. Kimathi, you first.
Okay, great. Thank you. First of all, it's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. Again, my name is Kimathi Boothe. I'm the Vice President of Energy Operations for Dunamis Clean Energy Partners, as well as Dunamis Charge. I'm an electrical engineer by trade. I've been in the energy management space for about 20 years now. And I started with Dunamis Clean Energy Partners about 10 years ago as one of just a handful of consultants in the energy management space, doing energy audits and energy modeling, energy engineering and the like. In 2015, we kind of took that knowledge and experience and began designing, developing, and eventually manufacturing LED lighting. And then in 2019, took that experience and began the design, development, and now the manufacturing of electric vehicle charging stations about 5 miles east of here on the east side of Detroit. That's about me in a nutshell.
Jan?
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation later about equity in mobility. My name is Jan Top, and I'm working for the Netherlands Embassy Network here in the US. The focus of our embassy network is to stimulate exchange between the Netherlands and obviously here the US. And I'm part of a smaller team focused on infrastructure and water management. One of the transitions we're working on is the transition towards a more sustainable mobility framework. And that includes everything related to active transportation, that includes charging, the transition towards electric vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, we have to make that as accessible as possible for everyone. And so equity is a very important topic as well. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about that. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony?
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Giara. I'm the Deputy Chief of Mobility Innovation for the City of Detroit. And I honestly feel like I'm in a room with friends, and most of you guys can probably be here in my seat and saying a lot smarter things than I will even try to say. But again, so nice to see all the familiar faces. For those that don't know me, I serve in a role that is meant to help with setting up the ecosystem of the future of mobility. And I self-identify as a mobility nerd. I love everything that has to do with moving people and goods and doing it in a very equitable, sustainable, and human-centric way, ensuring that when we're designing, when we're improving, when we're thinking not just for the short-term designs, but looking at the long-term designs, we're listening to our people. And we have our amazing partner here, Nico from Urbanism Next, thank you, who always keeps on ringing that bell in my ear saying, how are we going to be able to do a better job by first starting to identify the problem by listening, and then you can go and try to expand. So we try to do that. We're setting up the ecosystem of mobility of the future today, whether it's electrification, whether it's new technology, or sometimes just kind of deploying something that's small little solutions that can resolve things in the long run. So I think that's probably a good way of describing my work.
Absolutely. So thank you all. So now that we have that context, I always like to set the stage for equity. A few years ago, when we were talking about sustainability, when we were talking about problem solving, when we were talking about solving huge problems, which every problem seems pretty huge to me right now, then equity was not part of the conversation. So one of the things I'm most pleased with is that there are intentional efforts to embed equity, embed the discussion of equity when we're talking about sustainability, when we're talking about the clean energy transition. I want to make sure that as we're talking about equity, that we do something that I've learned to talk about, which is budgeting for equity. Equity does not happen easily. Equity is difficult, but it does not happen at all. True equity does not happen at all unless it is integrated at the front end, unless it is thoughtfully planned, and unless it is budgeted. So you, Tony, you talk about listening to voices, And I really want to talk about how do we make sure we're listening to the right voices, because if when we announce panels and meetings like this, you said it a minute ago, we can see the same people over and over again. It feels like we're talking to an echo chamber at some point. The people who get it are here, and the people who are not invited into the room, intentionally invited into the room for the discussion, are missing. So I want us to be intentional about who's missing and how do we get the right people in the rooms for these discussions that lead to collective action.
Beautiful question, by the way. But we didn't rehearse this particular question, just so that everyone knows. But I love it because it was definitely one of the main things that we do on a day-to-day basis as part of OMI. Now, OMI was set up by Mayor Duggan with a vision of kind of bridging the gap between what we do on a daily basis in terms of like making sure the city's running and making sure that we're thinking in terms of technology. But we quickly realized that sustainability, equity, again, human-centric design, ensuring all of those elements are within there. So every single project we went after, we were very intentional by adding that in there as an engagement element, making sure that we're hearing from the people directly, not just kind of doing check the box type of engagement events. We're literally rolling up our sleeves. Our partners are flying in from all around the United States to be able to be there and help us kind of make it better. Our automated driving systems project going on right now. It's a self-driving shuttle that will be live in Detroit next year for older adults and people with disabilities. We specifically decided to go for some of the least served roadway users out there. And we wanted to see how can we make it better. And instead of us assuming, or a Silicon Valley assuming what that shuttle should be like and what that experience should be like, we're customizing it on a daily basis. Right now, we're just at a public engagement session on Tuesday evening and trying to hear who's interested, what makes sense to Detroiters. Because we have a certain flavor to us here in Detroit that changes as you move around the country. And we want to make sure that that flavor kind of gets reflected with what we do. So we bake it into the projects, and then we go out there, roll our sleeves, and go top down, bottom up. Everyone needs to be included.
Thank you, Tony. Jan? Just designing, making sure the right people are at the table to have the conversations about equity.
Yeah, no, that is a very good question, as Tony mentioned, and I think it's also important to really know what equity is about. You have to identify what it really is, because I mean, as a policymaker, you can design for equity in different ways, right? One of the ways is just to maybe get as much bang for your buck, and then make sure that as many people get access to what you're designing as a sort of measure to improve transportation. But I think when it comes to equity, it's more focused on how can we work on that egalitarianism kind of principle, just to bridge the gap between people who have less access to transportation modes in this case, and people who have like normal access to transportation modes. And I think to make that quantifiable and to learn what that really means, I think that is the focus we should have as policymakers in order to move forward in the transportation realm.
Absolutely. And the fact that we're all learning, right? We're using vocabularies that are different than what we used even a few years ago. When I think about equity, just as a Black woman, my natural inclination is to make sure Black women are okay? If Black women are okay, and this, I'm talking about my natural inclination versus our intentional inclinations. My natural inclination is to say Black women are caregivers. If we get it, we're going to make sure everyone else gets it. But that's not true. We have to make sure that we're talking about, you mentioned people living with disabilities, people who are older. Every single person, when we talk about equity, we have to consider every single category. And part of my passion around it is the fact that my company is in clean energy, and it was excruciatingly painful to find our space, number one, but number two, to fight to be respected in clean energy because there's so few Black and brown companies in clean energy. So it's thank you for that applause, but that means that there's a construct that makes it likely that you're going to be less successful, even if you have the same background, the same tools. So when I was young, my parents used to say you had to be twice as good. And what they didn't say was that sometimes that won't be enough because you may not be around people who are willing to even recognize that you are twice as good or even able to measure you by the same metrics that they use for other people. Kimathi, people who don't know, Dunamis Clean Energy Partners is the only Black woman manufacturing, not assembling, manufacturing EV charging stations in the world. Natalie King, the CEO, and that does deserve some applause. Because when I talk about how tough it is for us to find our space, you can imagine with no organic on-ramps, how tough it is for her. And I just want you to talk a little bit about how different your journey, Dunamis Clean Energy, Dunamis Charge's journey was finding their space and why equity is important and would have been helpful.
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to piggyback off the last question and tie it to this question.
All right, now.
Because there's really a tradition in, when we talk about sustainability, definitely, but even more recently in equity, of a kind of them versus us. Even though we're talking equity, it's still a them versus us. It's the haves and the have-nots. It's those who have the resources and those who don't have the resources. Those who have the solutions and those who don't have the solutions. And typically those who don't have the resources and those who don't have the solutions and those who don't have are all lumped in the same bucket. And all those who have are lumped in a different bucket. And this bucket tries to pour into the don't have bucket. And really, when we talk about equity, it has to be, we're all in this together. There is no them and us. It's if the system isn't balanced, then it's not a sustainable system. You know, we've adopted a saying that goes back a decade from the NAACP that says, if sustainability is not centered in equity, then you're simply sustaining inequity.
Absolutely. All right, now, if y'all got a clap on you, this will do it. This will be the time.
And to bring it to this question, that's really the value that I've seen and that we as an organization have seen under a Black woman leadership. We talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and, you know, the value. There's a lot of talk about DEI spend. But the value goes beyond the DEI spend. It's about values and the commitment to values that someone who isn't of the traditional corporate structure will adhere to. And specifically the values that a Black woman would adhere to when it comes to building out her company and building out her team and the type of projects that she'll accept and the type of projects she won't accept and the type of funding she'll accept and the type of funding she won't accept. But that is where you find the real solutions to these problems that we're talking about. When you go to these communities that have the issues and have the problems and don't have the resources and don't have all of this stuff, that's where you will find the solutions if you give them the right tools and the right set of skills, problem-solving tools. You'll get more creative solutions than you can ever imagine. In our factory right here over on the east side, if you go within a mile, you will see more done with little than you will see any place else in the city. Take that innovation, that type of drive, provide them with some skill sets and some tools, and then see what type of problem solving we come up with as a society.
And if I have to add, sometimes just the microphone, just give your community out just the microphone and just open up your ears. And that's what we've done. And I completely agree with you 110%.
Yeah, the microphone is giving them a voice, right? But giving them a microphone also gives them an opportunity to be respected, to have their voices respected. And that's the difference. We talk about sustainability and we talk about inclusion. And you can listen to people all day long and still not drive equity. You can collect data, you can study, you can pay them, and you still won't be providing equity if you are not activating intentionality, equity, and that budget. So,
and Carla, if I could
please.
We've, as a company, as a Black woman-owned manufacturer, We've gotten a lot of microphone press. But to Carla's very initial point, if it's not budgeted, all you're doing is wasting my time, bringing me and flying me around to a bunch of places to re-educate you on something that I feel you should already know. It has to be budgeted for it to be real.
All right, preacher. Are you a preacher?
You got
You
me
are
hyped over here,
today.
Carla. You got me started.
You are today. So so we're talking equity, we're talking about mobility, we're talking about the infrastructure. And there's a lot of fear in the community about where mobility is going because they don't see infrastructure in the communities. If they come to downtown, if they come to certain areas, certain communities, then they see infrastructure. But the last mile, first mile solutions that aren't just driving, that really are mobility. Can you all talk about how we're going to solve the mobility problem, how we are going to build the infrastructure that helps solve the mobility problem? And for context, and Tony, I'm sure you have this data, for Detroit to be the motor city, there's a large percentage of Detroiters that have no motors, period.
And we're switching to the mobility city. So I don't like calling it the motor city without hashtag motor city, hashtag mobility.
All right.
We're new now.
And that's history. That's the present versus what we're moving toward. And if people that can't afford ICE engine cars now, and knowing the one thing that most people know is that EVs, which for many people is mobility, are more expensive, they're saying, I'm going to be in more trouble with the when the EV economy comes. So can we talk about how we're going to build that infrastructure and our considerations?
Do you want me to start?
Anybody.
Okay, I'll take a quick shot just because we're trying to look at this problem from all sorts of different perspectives. And if you look at it only from one perspective, you end up losing and your residents losing as well. So you want to build that ecosystem. So a place where we can all thrive and you can feel like everything's kind of connected together. So when it comes to electrification, especially now with clean energy and everything that's kind of circulating around that, we thought we need to build it and they will come, but then support it and they will use it. And then let them know, and then they'll be more educated and smarter about how to best use it. Even when I drive electric, my wife has a hybrid plug-in vehicle. When I'm driving my electric vehicle, I have to plan where am I going to charge it, how's it going to work, and I have the luxury of maybe a flexible time schedule, some things that others don't have. We have to keep that in mind when we're actually planning for that. And there are certain things we cannot plan for. What you do is you look at it as a multimodal solution. So the cars are one part of it, and I appreciate electrification, but electrification could happen for also micromobility. So you get there, instead of just charging your car, you're charging your scooter or your bike, and you can go around. We've put a lot of investment into putting bike lanes around the city of Detroit, and we're realizing that people are actually liking them more than we think, especially that many of them get plowed, etc. So you end up going in those certain directions. But you have to build it, and you have to think future ready, in the sense that we're building right now for, let's say, 4 vehicles charging at a time in some of those open surface slots around the city of Detroit. You think about underserved communities. You think about places where people would be frequenting, like recreation centers, potentially collaborating with churches. But we're trying to go with, let's say, low-hanging fruit that the city can control, so that could be a quick solution. With that said, you build it, and then you have to go and start supporting people to be able to afford those vehicles. Because if you cannot afford those vehicles, you cannot reap the benefits of them. Right now, when I'm charging overnight with a very lower rate, I did the calculation. I told you, I'm a mobility nerd. So at the end of the day, I do all these numbers. I did the little calculations. I'm saving 50% of what I would have paid on gas. Now, I did pay more for my cheapest version of the electric vehicle that I could get, but you have to kind of make sure that people have that ability to be able to access those vehicles, and that's what we're trying to look at and see other different solutions for those.
Yeah, and maybe you started off with like it's important to touch upon different aspects, and infrastructure is definitely one of the aspects to touch upon. Because I mean, if there's a gap in the infrastructure, then it's hard to maybe hop on your bike and go from A to B if there's like a missing link. And then I know from experience how important that is, because I grew up in the Netherlands, And I started cycling from a very, very early age. And I basically cycled to school by myself. And, that really gave me that freedom to, go places without my mom or my dad. And I think that it is very important to have like that infrastructure in place. But at the same time, it's not only infrastructure, right? It's more aspects we have to touch upon. And I'd like to refer to one of the frameworks transportation engineers are sometimes abiding by, called the STEPS framework. Maybe you've heard of it. It's one part is the S stands for spatial, and that is mostly referred to as infrastructure, but also is very much touching upon where we position certain urban planning kind of important services. The interplay between urban planning and transportation, that is a very vital thing to address in order to move the transportation framework forward. But it's also about like economic aspects. Things need to be affordable. If you want to use the train as a student, for example, with like lesser means, then there needs to be like a certain discount in place in order for you to be able to use public transit. Temporal is also a very the time aspect is a very important part as well, because I mean, if the bus is not running late at night, but when you want to use the bus, then it's not really serving the purpose. So that's what I'm trying to somehow illustrate here, is that it's not only infrastructure, it's definitely a systemic barrier. I do agree, but I think it's important to very much also focus on other aspects next to that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll just add to that by saying, what data shows generally is when you talk about the adoption of any technology or any new technology, infrastructure needs to be in place 2 years before adoption can really take place. And where we stand now, to meet the demand for EVs, electric vehicles, by the year 2030, we should be installing about 3,000 EV chargers a day until the year 2030. We're installing about 300 a day right now across the country.
I was about to say, because in this area, we're not even installing 300 a day.
And that's my whole point.
Unless they're at your house, because they're not
Absolutely
around
not.
where I go.
And to that earlier point, until you start seeing them, then, EV is something for the suburbs. It's something for a smaller group of people, or it's not there yet. So infrastructure becomes vitally important just for the overall main adoption. And then also, as you get infrastructure in place, it allows for the sparking of other ideas around mobility. The car is just the low-hanging fruit, because we're in Detroit and we know cars, first highway and more cars per capita and all that other stuff. But that's just the first step. Again, when you go to the community, there's all types of ideas that are springing out around e-mobility. And the more you can see infrastructure, then the more ideas you can really tangibly put to work around that.
And the ecosystem is not even close to being developed. So the opportunity for innovation and the opportunity for people in historically excluded communities to innovate solutions for their communities that other people would not think about, I think is absolutely amazing. One of my biggest fears is that as I talk to people in communities, they really are, as I said, there's a fear aspect that, number one, EVs are not for them. But number two, we are not going to solve the problem. We're not going to innovate. We're not going to invite them in to help create an ecosystem that works for everybody. So how will our move to multimodal mobility, that we're moving into, it's going to impact in the sense of jobs, right? And we talk about jobs all the time. But this clean energy transition is the biggest opportunity for innovation, for stability, economic stability that leads to affluence, wealth generation, and ultimately generational wealth, just from generating wealth to generational wealth. And Black and brown people really miss this opportunity. And every time we talk about the fact that the trillions of dollars being invested into the ecosystem are we keep saying once in a generation, which is loosely 25 years. Everything is being rebuilt. This is a once in a lifetime, and a lot of it is one-time money. So I want you all to talk about the responsibility you feel for making sure this money is spent equitably. The responsibility you feel for making sure we make good decisions with the one-time investment we have.
I would love to start hearing from that side right now because, again, I want to learn a few things. I have a couple of ideas, but I would love to learn like your ideas about where do you see us like maximizing on those investments that are coming in. Thank you. Great question, by the way.
You know, partially to your point is there's somewhat of a misnomer in our community and amongst Black and brown people that we're very liberal. You know, but really, when it comes to things we don't know, we will take 2 steps back
In a minute.
before we give it a second chance.
Yes.
So it really is around those investments in that confidence, right? So we talk about infrastructure, not just narrowly around the car. For example, we're developing chargers now for EV, for vehicles, but at some point, we're looking to migrate that charging aspect to the road so that your bike, your car, your skateboard, whatever mobility aspect, in setting us up, meaning all of us, including in particular Black and brown communities, because I think that's such an untapped resource.
Historically harmed.
Absolutely historically
Community.
harmed and disadvantaged and disinvested. I really is the term I prefer. Focusing there, and somewhat to Carla's earlier point, if you solve the problem at the most acute point, where poverty, health disparities, environmental justice, all of those elements combine, if you can solve problems there, then you've solved problems everywhere in this country. I don't know if that gets to the heart of your question.
Does that give you something to work with, Tony?
Oh, absolutely. I'm super excited. Did you have any?
I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear from you first. Yeah.
So that's all right. If you insist. I love what I'm hearing. The one thing that I keep on not hearing is how is it going to make financial sense? We keep on talking about how things are going to be multimodal. How are we bringing those solutions? All this money that's coming in, a lot of it is grants, and it's very short term. So essentially, you come, you deploy, you make sure it works out, and then it leaves. We're experiencing that right now with our self-driving shuttle. We didn't want it just to be for a month or two. We wanted it to be a full year, and now we're working so hard in terms of making sure that it extends beyond. Initially, we could afford 2 shuttles by a very generous grant by Knight Foundation. We went out and to try to find a business model for this. Delta Dental came in and said, you know what, we'll chip in for an extra one. We said, all right, we'll put in an extra shuttle. We as public servants and the private industry, of course, and everyone around here has to start thinking, how will this make financial sense? And not only for us, remember, financial sense, as you mentioned, is jobs, making sure that we're training the next generation of workers. How do we do that? In our next grant that we just won, and I was literally finishing up the contract outside before I walked in here for one of our 8 partners, we've actually required them to have summer interns and locally hired individuals in order for the knowledge transfer to continue within there. It's not enough just to bring in a smart vehicle or a smart technology and then disappears a year later. We want to make sure that people know how to use it, how to interact with it, how to fix it, how to even innovate with it. And that's when it starts working. So you start working jobs, economy, sustainability, and you're thinking beyond just environmental sustainability. We're thinking a system, an ecosystem sustainability. And then you start kind of maybe solving those things out there. I do want to plug in one other thing because we keep on talking technology, electrification. Sometimes the solution is a lot simpler than that. So one of the best things I've heard in the last few days is the city of Detroit is planting 75,000 trees around Detroit. Where's the clap? Like, this is something that 75,000 trees, that is going to be bringing in 300 jobs into Detroit. That's going to be a locked-in investment of $30 million into that will be directly or indirectly in there. What I'm thinking here is you start thinking as something as simple as planting a tree. How does that impact mobility? You have a shaded sidewalk for people to start using the sidewalk more. Active mobility, people's health is improved. People's access to things around them is there. We're fixing the sidewalks slowly but surely. We're getting there. I know it's frustrating. We have to plow the sidewalks. Eventually, with time, we're going to get there. We have to make sure that people can get to where they need to go when they need to get it in the great summer months that are a little hot, but we can handle them. But those really cold months when you have 2 feet of snow, that's hard. So you start thinking in that direction. I think we're on the right track. But we don't have all the answers. So if any of you have better answers, please let us know for sure.
Yeah, and I do think it's sometimes also important to flip the question. Because, I mean, if you're saying, okay, how can multimodality or transportation help to create jobs, or where do you have to invest? I think maybe it's also it's sometimes important to like look at, okay, but when it comes to mobility, it's a means to an end, right? It's not really, so it's a means to bring you to jobs, but it's not like a goal in itself, right? So I think it's sometimes also important, like, okay, if we look at where we create jobs or where we create like certain activities for people to engage in, how then is the transportation system supportive of that? And if you approach the question if from that perspective, then it also sometimes gives you the answers where to invest first and where to invest second. You know, it's interesting just being here and listening to you guys from a Dutch perspective, because I mean we are very much sort of a welfare state. Well, here the role of the public government is like a little bit different compared to what we are used to in the Netherlands. But I think the interplay between private equity, private funding, and public goals, or doing that for public goals, is very interesting here in Detroit, but also beyond that. And I think we can learn a whole lot from that. Yeah.
The back and forth, but I also like to explore your point about financial sense, because I think we have to look at financial sense and economic sense differently. Does the linear economy itself make financial sense? Number one, and financial sense for whom? For companies that are continue to reap profits, a lot of things make financial sense for that company, but for the greater good, it makes no sense at all, and is actually doing harm to everyone else. So I feel like we have to look at impact over the masses as opposed to whether something makes financial sense. The other thing is that because so much of this one-time money is, as you said, Tony, grants, a lot of it is not going to make financial sense. It just is not, because the amount that needs to be invested to drive equity, to achieve true equity. I feel like I'm talking too much to just be the moderator, y'all. So I'm going to just put that out there right now. But to achieve true equity, you cannot balance and say it's got to make financial sense, because inequity doesn't make sense, for all the generations that we've had it. And you can't make financial sense and say that you're going to drive equity.
Carla, you were going to say just what I was going to say. You just said it better. And but you're right to the sense that when we talk about financial sense, we don't look at the whole cost of everything. We look at profits, and we look at the corporation profit and loss, and not the societal cost, the health cost, the environmental cost, all the other costs that everybody else is absorbing that certain entities aren't, and just simply reaping the profit. And with this historic investment, we have to get it now, or there may not be another time, and may not be another opportunity to make up for some of the historic disinvestment that we've made in infrastructure in general.
Just one thing I would like to kind of maybe supplement. It
Please.
Doesn't have to be either or.
Absolutely.
I think it has to be and. And so hiring local, whether it's a company or a person, goes a long way. You're retaining the knowledge, you're building upon it, and you're starting to kind of build into the future sustainability of families, knowledge, information, etc. And we are very, very purposeful with those approaches, and we take it very, very seriously. So for example, with our SMART grant right now, our major focus was we wanted to ensure that local Detroit companies that are very capable of doing most of the things that we're doing, we're leading this effort and we're continuing with this. So I just want to ensure that when we're looking at this, even though, yes, sometimes we're saying, oh, maybe it's a local Detroit company may cost a little bit more, let's say, for example. But this is where, to your point and both your points as well, it may not make financial sense in the short term,
Right.
but if you look at the life cycle of the project, it does, because then you start adding on jobs and start adding on taxes. Something as simple as that. You start adding on all these little things, even inspiration. Think at Dunamis and how much inspiration that brings into the community. I've shown my daughter when you guys ended up at the White House, and I'm trying to show her that this is a Detroit company.
Yes.
And then you turn around and you're like, you know what? No, good job, Detroit. We've done a good job. So thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it.
The little black girl inside of me, when Natalie introduced President Biden, that meant something to me. So you can imagine what it meant to other people.
The little black girl inside of me was also very proud.
But again, just to my earlier point, and this is certainly a nod to Carla and all, that again is the testament of a black CEO and founder who builds up a company. Because as we were designing and manufacturing, we could have easily brought in 8 robots and 2 people to build out 50,000 chargers. We elected as part of our business strategy, led by our CEO, inspired by the ones who come before her, like Carla, to say, we'll bring on 14 people and a cobot and train all those people on all those stations in order to create a bigger economic development and pathway. So that's, again, the difference that you get with investing in a homegrown company from Detroit that's from the community that, often recruiting outside or looking other places doesn't get you.
Absolutely. And the fact that, please, do you have?
Yeah, what I wanted to, because what I liked about what you said earlier, like maybe, because you mentioned like linear economy, right? That's what you said. And I think you mentioned like it's maybe important to also think of like more of the circular or like,
Absolutely.
think more of like how you can reuse, recycle, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's also an important point when it comes to like investing in like the local community and the local economy. If you think more circular, then really investments will be done a little bit more locally. Because we have to, think of new facilities when it comes to recycling that can be done locally. We have to think of, how are we going to harvest from what's already there? For example, when it comes to construction projects, a lot of material can be reused in new buildings, and so that's creating a whole lot of new jobs locally. So I think that is an important notion to take in mind. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that when we think about the fact that we're all talking about things that we really didn't know that much about, or I didn't just a few years ago. So the amount of learning that is going to have to take place, and the fact that we're talking circular economy, that we need to invest in pre-cycling. How do we manufacture things so that they are more easily recycled for secondary use? That everyone should be, everything we throw away, we should be saying, who could use this? Every single thing we throw away, we should be saying, who could use this and how could I make it easier? Or how could someone make it easier for them to use it? Because that's when we move closer to a zero waste economy. It benefits all of us in every way. I want to thank you all for this amazing conversation. And we have time for questions. Do you have a microphone? Here. Oh. And here's another one if someone else has a question.
So I'm Donovan from Creator Connect. I had a friend who started a startup building electric vehicle stations. He goes to me, he says, hey, look, how about you help us distribute these across America? And I went through what you were just speaking about. And it was, where do you put them? You know what I mean? Who do you have to ask to get that there? And on top of that is, who owns the land? Mobile. They have their gas stations. If they want to put electric vehicle stations right there, they could do it like that. So where is that decision making made at? And who's fighting to make sure those policies are in place to make sure that, they have to purchase from maybe a minority-owned company to put their electric vehicle stations in there? You know what I mean? Do they get to produce them on their own? You know what I mean? So when you look at all these gas stations, the infrastructure is already there. because they can easily just add electric vehicle stations there, but it's like who do they buy it from? You know what I mean? Who and even if you want to say who owns the land? So how many minorities own the land to put the electric vehicle stuff there? Well, as all the cars will eventually be electric cars, that's going to happen. But who owns the land? Who owns the gas stations? So that was a situation that I ran into, where I'm thinking to myself, who they're lobbying? They're the ones at the White House. They're the one who's gonna get that deal. So I said, look, I'm not gonna waste my time with it. So it's like that's what a lot of minorities face, is that you may get a good product to distribute or sell, but you can't really sell it because it's just so many barriers in place. So that's
Okay.
so how do you break through that?
Yeah, so I'm going to
first?
invite you to take 2 steps forward instead of saying, I'm going to waste my time. I don't know what you all know about Justice 40, but of all the trillions of dollars over the next few years that we talk about are being invested in the clean energy economy, Justice 40 dictates that 40% of the benefit of that investment is going to go to historically excluded communities. So for the first time, you actually have an opportunity to have your voice heard. So I'm going to get your information, send you some stuff to read so that you can align yourself for the money and for the community that is going to help us use the tools that are being made available right now. And there's a guy in Lansing, a Black man in Lansing, whose name I can't think of, who has a charging plaza, an EV charging plaza right now that people can drive into and charge, and he figured it out. And we just have to keep figuring it out. The opportunity for innovation is absolutely unprecedented.
So we do use Justice 40, by the way. So Smart Grant, one that we just recently won, was based on deploying technology that will save lives of people, pedestrians, even vehicles in Detroit at certain locations, and those were selected using Justice 40, just to kind of back that up. But I also want to challenge your thought process about gas stations. I do not believe personally, as an EV charger myself, that the gas station model is the model for the future. That could be one version of it, but I do not want to go spend between 20 minutes and 2 hours at a gas station wasting my time doing nothing. But what I would want to do is for charging to be in front of the shopping malls and places that I go, maybe my barber shop, my church. These are the models that I see a little bit more successful because it would add to my efficiency and will not be taken away from my time. I don't want to go in and buy a donut. I'm not a huge donut fan at those gas stations, or a hot dog.
I would just add to that. I mean, there are historic and there continue to be historic barriers that we face. But this is an opportunity that we have to fight for. And it does take a fight. It isn't, okay, we got some legislation. It doesn't just hand it down. We, as Black and brown people, we've been fighting, and this is an opportunity we have to still fight. And not just for us to my personal thought is not just 40% of those dollars to benefit us, 40% of the dollars to come to us. But it takes us to go out and fight and get those dollars as well. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, the template has been set. Were you going to say something?
I just want to put a quick shout out to Rasha, and she's the mouthpiece of OMI. You also need to have the right platform to market and put your innovation and solutions out there. You have the right to have the right marketing tools, etc. If you can have the best solution of the world, and if you cannot actually put it out in the right image, just like Rasha does on a daily basis, then you will not be able to kind of also be successful. So this is from my own personal experience. Jan, was it?
I mean, but you were saying that sometimes it's really hard to apply for these grants. I think that is a valid notion, right? I mean, the grants are out there, but to go through all these different hoops, apparently that's kind of difficult. So maybe I also would like to challenge you, okay, tell maybe policymakers or the ones who are in charge for handing out these grants, what can they do better in order for you to be able to make that process easier? Do we need like a sort of interpreter to help companies out to make that process easier, or what is needed in order to be able to make that process a little bit more smooth sailing, so to say.
Yeah, and we have to end it, but we're going to be here. Yeah, but collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. So as we say, the struggle continues. Thank you all.